All right, let's make a start. Lamates Omid Aleph, halfway down the Omid. So the question we're going to look at is Mecha, right? We're doing the sugya of Mecha, what it means to make an objection, what it means to make an objection, whether it's has to be in front of him or not in front of him. And the question is a Mecha shlevahon have Mecha in have Mecha? Do you does it count if it's in front of the person or not? We know that la halacha the Mecha doesn't have to be in front of him, right? It can be far away. We say news travels, right? News travels. But it's not a simple thing, and not everyone agrees with it. And the Gemora asks, because if you remember, we finished the sugya last time, that basically we were defining, the previous sugya was a classic kind of sugya where the Gemara's tried to define the parameters of what will count as a valid objection and what won't count, right? So for example, if the person puts a limitation, either the person speaking, the person objecting, or the person listening puts puts a sort of limitation on how far the news should travel. The question is that valid or not? And the conclusion, which is spelled out in the Rashbam, is that whether or not you object, whether the person objecting says, don't say anything to him, right? Don't tell him anything, or whether the people who are listening say we're not going to say anything, in all those cases it does count, because we say that they will say something, because that's what people do. And the only case which it does not work is when the person objecting tells them not to say anything. If he says don't say anything to anyone, the Gemara calls that lo mafkian l'chushusa. Don't say a word. Don't tell anyone anything. That is not a mecha, and the reason is because in the case where he says to them, you mustn't say anything, right? So he's told them not to say anything. Why should they say anything, right? Why on earth should they? Why it's obvious, right? It's obvious they shouldn't be in a bid. They won't say anything because he told them not to. Now the Gemara says, Amar Rav Nachman, Rav Nachman holds, and Rav quotes Rav Nachman is saying that if you make a mecha not in front of him, it's a good mecha. It works, right? That means to say you don't have to send a shliach to object in front of him. Once he's made a mecha, if not in front of him, it's a good mecha, because he can come and hear about it. And even if the machzik doesn't know about the objection, right? We're not worried about that, because you've done your job. You have to make sure you've done your job, you've done your objection, you made your mecha, and that's it. That disturbs his chazak. It's actually a the Mishnah says, Rabbi Yehuda says a whole different perspective, if you remember, in the Mishnah, on what mecha is for, how chazaka works. Why do you have 3 years? So we've learned the whole way through the Mishnah Perek that the 3 years are because people only look after their documents for 3 years, and after 3 years they chuck them away, they lose them, and therefore you can then establish chazaka, right? To protect the buyers. Otherwise, because people lose their documents, right? Rabbi Yehuda has a totally different explanation. He says nothing to do with that. He says that people actually should form a chazaka straight away. If we live in the same town, I'm in your property, I'm sitting in your house, and you don't say anything, then that's a proof that it's mine. You can't come along and say it's yours, because why didn't you say anything straight away? Right? That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. So what's the 3 years? Rabbi Yehuda says they only said 3 years, right? Yeah. So that if the person would be in Spain, I think they translate it as Spain, and he makes a chazaka for a year, and it takes them a year to go and tell him, because it takes a year to get there. And he comes the next year to object. We can't even fathom Spain in those. It was so far away from Bovel. It was like a different planet, right? And he's going to come the next year, right? He's going to come the next year. So in other words, what is the function of 3 years? It's not a fixed thing, 3 years. It's just that in a case, it's the maximum. In a case where it's the maximum it will take for you to form a chazaka. The maximum amount of time it will take for you to form a chazaka is 3 years. Because no one's going to be further away. People don't go further away than that, right? So the maximum, he's going to be that far away. It's going to be that long to get back to you. You understand? Therefore, but it could take you 2 months to form a chazaka. It could take you 1 month, it could be 1 day. It's a variable thing. It just depends how far away the guy is.
He's been there for a year before he makes the chazaka.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, that is a thing, right? It does seem to say that he is there. He is there for a year.
Would not the point be that the Rabbanon committed to Kono 3 years?
Well, we know that they made a Kono. The question is why.
They judged it to be a reasonable amount of time.
No, that's not what he says at all. That has nothing to do with that. We've got to have a reason why it's 3 years. It's got to be logical. What do reason? It's got to be reasonable. What's the fine reasonable? Why for why there? Right? Why? Yeah, no. This is what. So why would he need to be machzik for a year? For a year, he is in Aspamia, the Achzik Shana, and it takes a year to tell him, and he comes back the next year. It's a good point. We mentioned this before when we explained the Mishnah. One second, let's just look back what we said there. So Rashbam says on the Mishnah, within the first year, that's when people hear about it. So it seems to take time, people to hear about it, right? And then the second year they go and tell him, and the third year he comes back and makes him a chal.
That would mean it might be at the end of the first year.
Exactly. It doesn't mean you're right. You're right. According to that,
that's the maximum.
No, I'll tell you what it is, Jeremy. I'll tell you what. Yeah, and I'll tell you what it is. If we both live in the same town, then it could be immediate because I'm going to hear about it. I'm going to know about it, and I should have objected straight away. But if I don't, far away, then it takes time for the coil to be generated. You have to remember that people are not your personal carriers of your news. You've got to have enough of a critical mass of people to carry the sound across the ocean, and that's going to take a year. That's what seems to be the case. Do you understand what I'm saying, right? If you're relying on the noise carrying, on the sound of the fact that you've been in this land carrying across the sea, you need to be in the land for a year, and then it takes a year for them to get there. It takes you a year to get back and object. That's the point. It takes a year to produce that call. Sometimes I don't need a year to produce that call. If I live in the same town as you, it doesn't take. It takes to be immediate, right? That's what Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is. Now, what do you see from Rabbi Yehuda? So the Gemora spells it out very clearly. Look at the Gemora. Gemora says, if it's the case that an objection that's not in front of him is a valid objection, you can make an objection wherever you are. Lomali lemesi. Why does he have to come? Why does he have to come back and tell him and object in his face? Why do you have to have the third year for him to come all the way back and object? Let him sit where he is in his place and make an objection there. So it must be that that Rabbi Yehuda holds that objecting right in front of him is not a good objection, and it has to be face to face, and that's why you have 3 years according to Rabbi Yehuda, because it gives enough time for him to come back and object, right? And object, right? Now, okay. Now, I mean, there's an obvious question here, which is what? What's Rava doing? Rava quotes Rav Nachman as making a statement. This is very common. He quotes Rav Nachman and then asks a question of Rav Nachman, because he quotes him in order to ask a question of him, effectively, right? Rava asks a question. Rava quotes Rav Nachman, and then he asks a question from the Mishnah, from Rabbi Yehuda. But why didn't the Rabbanon support him? For the same price, the Rabbanon in the Mishnah support him. Because what do the Rabbanon hold? It's clear from the whole sugya that we've learned until now, right? Leave aside Rabbi Yehuda's view. Yeah, that because that's what they say. They say that this whole business of having the different countries and the different areas and Yehuda and Golil and there's no transportation and news doesn't travel, etc., right? Okay, and therefore, and we said that what? We said that people don't carry the news, and you can sit where you are. You can sit where you are in the in your place, and your news will generally travel. Only it doesn't travel between Yehuda and Golil because not enough people go between the two because they don't like each other. You remember that?
Yeah.
So the Rabbanon clearly hold You can object not in front of the guy. So why is it that the Gemora is asking is a question from Yehuda? Support him from the Rabbanon. What's Rava's problem, right? Much better to support him from the Rabbanon, right? Yeah. I mean, the Rashbam gives a very simple answer. He just says that he could be that he understands that Rava explains the Rabbanon differently. He just explains the Rabbanon differently. The Rav will explain the Rabbanon differently, and that's how Rava asked a question from Yehuda. He'll just say that the Rabbanon were talking about a different scenario. He would explain their opinion in a different way, so there's not a support for Rav Nachman. Tosfos gives into more detail there.
Say that you can do it
without being what? Yeah, that's how we've learned the Gemara before. That's how the Gemara understood. The Rabbanon says doesn't need to come in front of him. Because the noise will travel, that's enough, Anyway, it gives more involved to answer. But anyway, let's see. Either way, this is what Rav Nachman does. This is what Rava does. So he asks a question from Rabbi Yehuda, which seems to contradict. The more answers, Hossam over there, it's just a good piece of advice. In other words, it's true that it does look like that because Rabbi Yehuda says you've got to come all the way back from Spain to make the objection, that you've got to make the objection in front of him. But actually, it's not the case. Actually, you could object in Spain. And you know why Rabbi Yehuda says you should travel all the way back? Just a good piece of advice. Because if you don't, you're going to do, it's much harder. It's much harder to get something back from someone if they've already used it. That not the case? If you have someone who's already, let's say someone has used your land, someone has destroyed your property, whatever, right? It's much harder to take them to a Beis Din and get back what they've used already. Avi has precious diamond, and chas v'shalom, someone takes it, right? It's gone. It's in the bottom of the ocean. Much harder to get it paid back, right?
Muslims if he comes back.
Sorry, we give you nightmares. But you understand? Hopefully not. But you understand what I mean? Like, I'm saying that, right? This is called kosher gezel hanecha. That means if you know the diamond's here, but it's in someone's safe, it's much easier to get it, right? Because I know where it is, and I can take it to Beis Din, and I can prove that diamond was mine, right? But if it's gone, and I need you to pay me back, well, it's going to depend whether you've got the money and you get the cash and everything else. You know what I mean? And they send the bailiffs in. It's not, the whole process is much more difficult. That is called kosher gezel hanecha. Theft, which has been consumed, which is gone, which is no longer here, is much harder to get back. You with me?
Anyway, he's been on the land anyway.
He has. But the point is that as with the Rabbi Yehuda is telling the guy who wants his land back, right, to run back from Spain. So, right? Because that's the best thing you can do, right? That's what he's saying, right? Should come and take land and fruit. Best to come and take the land and the fruit as quick as you can.
Would you not have thought that if you want to do a proper machal, you have to go in front of the guy? Because this idea that he's going to hear just by fundamental gossip is not a responsible way of dealing with the machal. So someone claims to be in your land.
No, but it doesn't matter because I fulfill what I need to do. So when he comes along later and complains, Beis Din are going to laugh at him, and they're going to say you lost out because this guy made him machal. As long as it's provable, you want to do it in front of Eidim. It's much easier for me. I'd much rather not come and confront you. It's scary to confront someone. Much happier to sit where I am and make him machal in front of Eidim. I've done my job.
Are we saying there's a specific process to machal?
Yeah, of course. But the question is, does that machal need to be in front of him or not? That's the question. And we're saying that Rava says it does not. Rav Nachman says it does not need to be. And Rava asked a question on Nachman. Ostensibly, Rabbi Yehuda requires the machal in front of him. Says, well, no, he doesn't. Actually, it's absolutely fine for him to make a machal in Spain. Why does Yehuda tend to come from Spain? Because it's a good piece of advice, so that you should be able to get the food back, to get the stuff back before he consumes even more of it, basically, or whatever. We'll see the Rashbam. The Gemora now, let's finish the Gemora. So Gemara now finishes off with one final point. The fact that Rava asked a question on Rav Nachman, that implies that Rava himself does not hold, right? That the objecting not in front of him is a good objection, because otherwise, why would he ask a question on Rav Nachman? You understand? Rava quotes Rav Nachman as saying you can object even if you're not in front of him, and Rava asks a question on that, implying that he doesn't hold like that. Surely Rava himself says, second wide line, Havya Machor. We know that Rava himself said clearly that Machor not in front of him is a good Machor. Rava said in the previous Omid. That is a good objection. So why is he asking a question of Nachman if he himself holds with that? And the Gemara gives a very straightforward answer. You understand? No, Martin, you're confused.
So I understand the words of the Gemara. So Rav is just being a diak in Rav Nachman and he's trying to learn that.
But if he holds that Rav Nachman, then why is he asking a question of him?
So if he holds like Rav Nachman and Rav
To ask a question of himself.
So then how can he hold it like that? Okay.
Yeah, he wants to destroy Rav Nachman's opinion. He says, like, how can you, Rav Nachman, say that? Because you're contradicted by Rabbi Yehuda. So that implies he doesn't hold like it. The Gemara gives the straightforward answer, which is Basra Rabbi Birnbaum Rav Nachman Sobra. After he heard it from Rav Nachman, that's how he came to his opinion. So when we quoted Rava on the previous Omid as saying that a Machar works even not in front of the guy, that was based on this. That was based on this statement of Rav Nachman, which Rava challenged, came to understand that in fact Rav Nachman was correct, and therefore held like it. And therefore that is how it sews up the whole sugya and helps us understand Rava's opinion. Yeah, that's it. Right. Okay. Let's see Rashbam. Rashbam is 1 second, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lines down. Right? 10 lines down on wide lines. Right. So the Rashbam says the Aval Gav the Oisvei Rava Rav Nachman. So it's a bit strange. Rava's quoting Rav Nachman, and then he asks a question, right? So even though he does ask a question of Rav Nachman, Shittas the Gemara he Baharbim Kumiskein. The Gemara often does this. Rashbam is telling you here how the Gemara works. When Rava heard the statement of Rav Nachman, that we're going to say, right? He asked this question on him. Rav Ashi says, "Siddur Gemora, Siddur Gemora, who took Omar Rav Nachman." Rav Ashi phrased it this way, and Rav Ashi and Ravina, they were the ones who basically set out the Gemara as we have it, right? They were the Sof Gemara, and they were the ones, the Amiroim, at the end of the Amiroim, pretty much, who basically set out the text as we have it in the Bavli, yeah, right, and they set it out like when Rav Ashi organized it. He said Omar Rav Nachman. Right, but he put those words in. But really, what happened was that Rava asked he heard it from Rav Nachman, and then he asked the question. And Rav Ashi just phrased in such a way as if Rava said it in the name of Rav Nachman. And then he just asked the question. He explains afterwards the question that he asked him. But really, it wasn't Rava. Really, it was just Rav Nachman asking a question on. Rava asking a question on Rav Nachman. But he phrased it as if Rava was quoting Rav Nachman, and afterwards, yeah. One of the amazing things, by the way, is nowadays you can just go online and you can find the earliest manuscripts of the Gemara, 14th century manuscripts of the Gemara, which you can read, basically, without Rashi. They didn't print them with Rashi in those days. It's available. Even Sfari, I think, I've incorporated it in the. You can read the manuscripts. Not quite as old as Rashi. Well, there are some contradictions in Gersh. That's why you have Hachi Garsina. There are differences in the texts. And they're much more big. The earliest manuscripts, I think, like I say, are kind of like the 1340s and that type of. I think those are the earliest. So there might be fragments from earlier, but that's the. And there will be discrepancies between texts because that's why you have we know that because sometimes you've got brackets and things and whatever. But you can actually look at these very early versions. Yeah. So you can see things, for example, pre the Christian census. What are the passages that were affected by the Christian census? That's where they're all taken from. They've been put back in the more modern Gemaras. The passages that refer to Yoshki and things like that. Yeah. Okay. Sanhedrin, Sota. So now the Gemara says. So the Gemara Rashbam carries on. What is the point about Machar Shelo B'Fanav Havi Machar? We don't require that he sends his shliach to object in front of him. Once he's objecting not in front of him, Havi Machar, it's a good objection. Because it can come to his ears. Even if the machzik has no idea about the objection of the ma'arer, the person who's claiming it's his, not bothered. I've done my job. I've objected. This one has objected properly. I've fulfilled what I needed to do. I don't have to worry about anything else. So you're right, Jeremy. It's a risk, but it's not really a risk because I've done what the Chacham told me to do. I've done my objection, and even if the guy stands up and shouts later, I never heard about it. So what? It's not my problem. I said it in front of Adam. I did what I needed to do. The next sugya of the Gemara is actually how many people I need to say it to. Fascinating sugya. The next sugya is going to work around, like paradoxically, the question of Lashon Hara, like, and how, like here in a bizarre way, like we like the opposite of Lashon Hara. Do you notice that? Like we want this, we want this news to travel. So we need to work out what normally will travel and what won't travel. But that's part of the question. That is part of the question. No, of course, it's not. No, it's not. Business is not a heter for Lashon Hara.
Business has to say.
If it's latoyalis, we call that latoyalis. If you want to save someone from a bad business deal, that's called latoyalis. It's for their benefit. They could lose out financially, exactly, right? And therefore is not subject to the prohibition of Lashon Hara, right? But that's part of the question. That's part of the question.
Is the Gemara also? Robert, who was it saying that you give advice in terms of it's good for you to go to Spain and come back?
No, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. We'll get to it. You can ask a question we've done. Let's get that. Asa Rav Nachman Asa Rav asked a question of Nachman, and he said, the Gemara says, are you going to ask me other parach miseifa? Let's see Emiresha. You asked him a question from the end of the Mishnah, but support him from the first half. We said that objecting not in front of him is a good objection. That means that was the Rabbanon. Says the Gemara. Says Rashbam. You could say the Rava fits in the first half of the Mishnah on other subjects. In other words, not other subjects, but another explanation. Rava had another explanation in the first half of the Mishnah that wasn't the support for Rav Nachman. That's what Rashbam leaves it at that. Tosfos says, we're not going to go to. Tosfos goes through a whole way of how he would have understood the Mishnah, so that it wasn't a support for Rav Nachman. Anyway, let's carry on. Now, the Rashbam again spells out Rabbi Yehuda's reasoning. Talmud Rabbi Yehuda, the reasoning of Rabbi Yehuda, lav mishum detzlas shnin misdoinish b'shtarim. It's not because 3 years people look after their documents. Nothing to do with that. As it explains, in order he would be in a certain place. For Talmud the chazaka l'didei, and the reason of chazaka according to Rabbi Yehuda. Mishum delo shovik inish da'ochli arei below rishuso afilu shah achas v'shosik. A person does not leave someone else to use his land without his permission, even 1 hour, and be quiet. That's the rule. So why was it that they gave you 3 years? Because sometimes the person who is claiming it's his is a year's journey away. And his complaint is not going to come to his ears until 3 years. It takes 3 years. And he's coming to dispute the Tanakama. We're not worried about emergency times and news not traveling, etc. Right? If you make a chazaka in front of him, that's immediately a chazaka. Since he did not object immediately. Since he depended the reason on aspamya, as we said later on in our parak, right? So chazaka in front of him is immediately chazaka. That's what we're saying, because he should have objected straight away. And that's why he talks about Spain, because that's the only reason to have 3 years, because you just be too far away, and it'll take you time to get back and take the news to travel and everything else. The Yovel Shona Acher says Rashbam, Rava thinks that Davke Ka'omar, and that he's specifically talking about Rabbi Yehuda. That's in the word Bachad's word Rabbi Yehuda. Sheyovei HaMa'ara, the Rabbi Yehuda specifically says that the Ma'ara himself will come, Sheyovei Ma'ara Atzma, v'yimcha, and object, b'sof Gimel, b'fon of Shel Machzik, in front of the Machzik. If you object not in front of him, it's no good. Therefore, and therefore his claim is that therefore chazaka that's not in front of him should also not be a chazaka. Because remember, we've learned this before, the Rashbam holds there's two sides of the same coin. If you say that you can't object somewhere else, you have to be in front of him, that means you also can't be machazik, not in front of him. We saw Machlokes Rashi and Tosfos about this. Tosfos seems two things nothing to do with each other. Tosfos says, we saw this earlier, right? That Tosfos says you're going to hear about someone in your land, regardless. You're not going to hear about an objection. You're going to hear about someone in your land, right? The Rashbam learns, no, they're two halves of the same coin. If my objection is not going to travel, your chazaka is also not going to travel, right? And therefore what? If the halacha is that I have to object in front of you, so therefore, chazaka that's not in front of you also is not a chazaka. Because I'm not going to hear about,
Does that hold then?
because the objection won't travel, and therefore I can't be machzik, not in front of you. It's two sides of the same coin. It's not so much the point, in 1 second, it's not so much the point in that whether or not the chazaka will travel, it's the fact is that that if it's the case that it's not a good objection unless I'm standing there in front of you, right? That's what we're saying, okay? And you have to come there. So therefore, a chazaka also doesn't work if it's not in front of you.
But does that work?
Why not?
Because let's just say good news travels fast, and let's say bad news.
Well, that was it's not. Well, I mean, it's not a question of good or bad news.
And I'm saying, can you equate the two? You are doing so.
But we seem to be saying that. We seem to be saying that.
Is that a fair premise to say that bad news will travel as quickly as good news?
Well, 1 second. Well, I mean, here we're saying.
You seem to be reluctant.
Rob, 1 second. 1 second. There's two ways of understanding. 1 second. There's two ways of understanding. There's two ways of understanding the effect of requiring a person to travel from wherever he is in the world, yes, into your back garden and tell you to your face, you're in my land. There are two ways of understanding the effect of that. The one way of understanding the effect of it is, as the simple reading of Rabbi Yehuda seems to be, okay, make the journey. Make the journey, right? Make the journey. We're giving you time. If you want to claim ownership of this land, make that journey, right? Come along to his face and tell him that's your land. And if you don't do that, you've lost out. That's one way of understanding, right? That's one way of understanding, right? That's one possibility, right? And that in fact is what Rabbi Yehuda himself says. That's what Rabbi Yehuda requires you to do. That's what he says in the Mishnah. He's in Spain, year here, year back. Yeah, that's what he requires. Come on, okay. If you don't do it, what happens?
Yeah.
If you don't bother, what happens? After 3 years, it's a chazaka. Because you should have come. You had the chance. Might have been a year's journey, but you had the chance, right? That's Rabbi Yehuda's view. Rava disputes that. Rosh Hashanah is just pointing out that Rava doesn't quite hold like Rabbi Yehuda. Rava says, no. Rava says, if I'm all the way in Spain and you are here in Babylon and you are in your land, your piece of land, right? Or you're in Eretz Yisrael, and you are all the way over in Spain, and we hold that objections have to take place face to face, that means that you can't form a chazaka. Because you don't expect the guy to spend a year journeying over from Spain. Do you understand? So that's the second possibility of the outcome of requiring Machar B'fonov. Do you understand what I'm saying? There's two possibilities of the din. We're going according to the opinion that says you have to object in front of the guy. There's two possibilities of that rule. Number one, it could be, okay, great. So come along, make an objection. If you don't, it might take a long time, but after 3 years, the guy gets the field. The other alternative is no, we're saying if you have to come along and it's so far, that means I can't form a chazaka. I can't form a chazaka because he can't object where he is, therefore I can't form a chazaka, right? And that's what Rosh Hashanah is saying here. And that is what Rava himself is saying, is proving to Rav Nachman. He is saying, because Rabbi Yehuda going with Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. You can't object far away. Therefore, your chazaka is nothing. And look, if you look at the Rashbam, he spells that out. He says, even though Rabbi Yehuda have your chazaka ba'achi, even though Rabbi Yehuda holds that it is a good chazaka, even though you're in Spain, lo sfir like Rabbi Yehuda. Rava does not really fully hold like Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda requires you to go from Spain all the way to Bavel or to Eretz Yisrael and to make your objection. But a Rava lo natzrichenu. And according to Rava, we don't require him to do that. Because he can't object in Spain. Therefore, the machzik can't make it. Yeah, the machzik can't form a chazaka. Because you can't object there, because you have to come in front of him, and it's clearly unreasonable, says Rava, to make you travel all the way from Spain. That's crazy. I mean, that's what Rava was, you have to leave your, right? Therefore, I can't form a chazaka, because you're nowhere near me. And that is his question. And that is his question on Rav Nachman. That is his question on Rav Nachman, right? That is what he's asking Rav Nachman, right? Okay. So this is how it is.
What about your
One second. Right? So he says, the Marshal kind of spells this out in the Rashbam. He says, near a Pirish Litvara, the Vade Rova Karabbanon Svirle, the Halacha Kavosai. Rova definitely holds like the Rabbanon, because the Halacha is like them, the Gabi Rabbi Yehuda. He wasn't, the whole premise of Rava's question of Nachman wasn't to hold like Rabbi Yehuda. We hold like the Rabbanon, we don't hold like Rabbi Yehuda. Yochid v'Rabbi, Malachim k'Rabbi. The lo koparich l'Rav Nachman, ela de bahach mils to the boy Rabbi Yehuda machal b'fonov, lo pligi Rabbanon oleik, meshkos Rashbam le'el, to let say Melisha. Right? It's just that Rava was going down the route that on this point, right, about whether objections can be made shaloi b'fonov, there's no dispute, according to Rava, between Rabbanon and Rabbi Yehuda. Everyone agrees you have to come along and object in front of him. V'hashta, now the Rabbanon, according to Rabbanon, the afim nomar, even if we're going to say afim nema the chazaka nishmas ba'aspamya, that the chazaka will be heard in aspamya, that news will travel. We're worried about emergency times. You heard of a golok shas cherim, news doesn't travel. If you're not going to go from, according to Rabbanon, news doesn't travel from Yehuda to the Galilee. How much more so it's not going to go to Spain, right? And we're not going to require him to come in front of him to make an objection. And the Mechah doesn't work in Spain. And we actually had a similar case to this Masha earlier on with Rabbi Yehuda. We said, right? Someone who's fled because they're scared of their life, right? Right, you can't make a machor by definition because he's not able to come back. He's terrified, right? He's terrified.
His address to be found out.
Yeah, it's all he wants to know. So you can't make him. So in other words, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, we said if it's a situation where the guy can't possibly come back, then it doesn't work, right? Then it doesn't work. So what we're saying is what we're saying is that what the Rashbam is doing here, trying to achieve, is resolve the question of how Rava can come along with Rabbi Yehuda and ask a big question on Rav Nachman. What do you mean? We don't hold like Rabbi Yehuda, hold like the Rabbanon. Why are you coming along and asking a question of Rabbi Yehuda? And the answer is that according to Rava, there's no dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanon about this point, about whether or not you make an objection in front of him or not in front of him. Everyone holds, according to Rava, Mechah has to be in front of him. You have to come along and make it in front of him. What's the machlokes in Rabbanon? According to Rava, the machlokes is whether you are effectively permitted to make a chazaka in those circumstances or not. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you are. You can form a chazaka. The guy should come from Spain. Let him come from Spain. That's why they gave 3 years as Rabbi Yehuda. So you got time to travel. Okay? You understand? That's it, right? But Rava, but according to the Rabbanon, because Rava's now going to transport the concept of, which we're saying everyone agrees to, have your mechor, right? And you have to actually make a joke front. According to the Rabbanon, yeah, if you hold mechor, you can never form a chazaka unless the guy's in front of you. Because since the Rabbanon holds that if travel is not easy, that's what they hold, right? Travel is not easy. You can't travel from even Yehuda and Gala. It's not, you can't make a chazaka because people don't normally travel, right? Yeah. So therefore, Kol Shekain to Spain, where travel is much, much harder, and therefore if you hold that machash, that you have to make an objection in front of him, right? It will be no chazaka. It will be no, you can't possibly form a chazaka. You can't possibly form a chazaka. So what Rava has done, and it's a bit involved this, but what Rava has done is he's basically constructed an explanation of the entire Mishnah, right, around learning the whole Mishnah, not like Rav Nachman. That Rav Nachman says you can make a machal wherever you like in the world. That's what Rav Nachman holds. And Rava says no. Rava says no. I'll prove to you that Rabbi Yehuda's opinion clearly is you have to make an objection in front of him. And I hold that Rabbanan don't dispute that either. And they have a simple, right? And they all hold. You have to go and object in front of him. And the whole machlokes in the Rabbanon is just on this nakuda and this point about whether or not you can therefore form a chazaka or not. And the Rabbanon say you can't as a result if it's travelable, traversable. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And therefore, because of that, the fundamental question remains: you, Rav Nachman, are in opposition to the Mishnah, because the Mishnah holds, both Rabban and Rabbi Yehuda hold, right? You've got to make a chai in front of the guy's face, and then you say you don't. How can you say that? So that's according to the Mashal. That's really, it seems, what the Rashbam is trying to achieve here: an explanation of the whole Mishnah of how it's really a question not just in Rabbi Yehuda, also in the Rabbanon as well. Is that clear first before we ask your question? No, you've got to get it clear first.
Yeah. No.
Well, you don't agree with it. I didn't ask whether you agree with it. No. Well, I'll come back to you whether you agree or not. First, understand it. Right. Is it relatively? Do you understand that?
No, I get it.
Again, we haven't changed the key point of the sugya. The key point of the sugya is that Rav Nachman simply says, right? You're saying the machash in front of having is a machar, and our Mishnah says it's not. It's just that he's trying to sort of gain that the Rabbanon will also agree to that point as well, right? What's your problem, Jeremy?
Three. First of all, you can say that it's supposition to say.
Three questions. You only get one. I'm joking. Karen.
Well,
go on. What?
Say supposition to say that if you're going to create one, you have to create the other. You say that between Matzik versus Machal, they're equal. I don't necessarily would agree that they hold.
No, we saw before that there is an argument to be made. There is an argument to be made that the two are separate. The two are separate, right? The two are separate. It's not quite the same as we're saying that. We're not saying the same. We're not interested in whether or not it is more likely that you will hear about someone in your land than vice versa. It's entirely possible that it's much more likely you will hear about someone in your land than that person hearing about your objection, which is the argument we made before. And we said there's a coil. People hear about other people in their land. They're not listening out for the guy objecting. That's what we said. That still holds.
Right.
What we're saying is that one way of understanding, which is how Rava understands it, Rava Rabbi Yehuda, right? One way of understanding the effect of requiring a person to make a machor in front of him is that you cannot form a chazaka if the guy is on the other side of the world. Because obviously, he doesn't have to up sticks and walk or travel by ship for a year because you have decided to squat in his land. It's bizarre. You understand? It's like because you've decided to squat in his nice new apartment, we require him to leave his business in Spain and come along to visit you and object. Well,
in your field for 20 years, and the guy decides to come back after 20 years, and he says,
yeah.
of course I didn't say Machal because I wasn't around.
Yeah.
But there's no question about it. This is my land.
Right.
My land. And the guy and the man, the the Masik has not a leg to stand.
It's very fascinating the way you're putting it, and I think that is the outcome. If you would hold Machor Shalei B'fonov, right? Lo Havyu Machor, and you have to come in front of him, because the protection. If you hold an objection has to be made in front of him, then the protection that we want to have in place to protect the buyer, which is what we've tried to do the whole time, right? Protect the buyer, cannot exist because it's manifestly unfair on original owners. Do you understand? It's manifestly unfair to require someone to come all the way to wherever their properties are located to make an objection. And therefore, if you are machzik in land where the owner is on the other side of the world, you are taking a massive risk, even if you think he sold it to you and you claim he sold it to you. And what should you do to mitigate that risk, Jeremy? That's the answer.
Yeah.
It's not that you don't have a solution. You've got a solution. Oh, look after your paperwork.
Also, it's not entirely alien even today, because basically is when you buy a piece of real estate, you check the title, right? Now, in part of checking the title, very unlikely that the seller will give you a full set of warranties and indemnities against that title. The idea is that you're meant to check it.
Yeah.
So
Buyer beware, right?
a little bit, but so therefore, if you make a incorrect assumption about that title, that's the risk. So sometimes that can be reflected in the price. So if there's not enough information available on the title, it may be that you're paying less because you're taking the risk that actually there's an issue. But one question I do have is, why don't we apply the classic, the classic mechanism of shlichus here?
Go on. Oh, they can send the shliach.
Yeah. Why don't we expect? I mean, it's a business opportunity in general. I mean, the Gemora should have set up, come and makar on my behalf. Yeah. .com. Yeah. Rent a makar. Yeah. So why? I understand we don't expect him to come.
It's very interesting. No, it's a very interesting question, because the Rashbam did hint or reference beforehand the concept of a shliach.
Yeah.
When he said the other way around, that objection in front of him is an objection, that you can object wherever you are, he says, "V'lo bo'ina," we don't require shalach shluchai. He should send his shliach to make an objection, meaning implying that in a situation, if we would hold that you have to come in front of him, then yes, you could send a shliach. It's true. You could send a shliach, but it's still going to take a year.
I understand that, but
and it's a lot of expense as well.
You've got to find someone who's willing to travel.
You got to pay someone for a year's wages.
Yes, but you are just making an assumption. In all of these cases, it's probable that these are trade routes, right? So the whole point is the average shaliach wasn't just going for that one purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah. If either he was going anyway, and he made a shaliach about a bunch.
Yeah. That's fair enough.
Or he's a professional shaliach, so he's popping around town doing a number of Amazon style makar deliveries.
Yeah.
He's going from Antwerp to London twice a day.
Yeah, it's a fair point. I mean, the truth is, I have a question generally on the concept of a year.
Yeah, well, it's tough for you.
No, I'm not sure why it should take a year
to
to get to Spain. Even in those days, I'm just not sure why it should take a year to get from Israel to Spain. It's a ship. It's not that. Doesn't do that.
You also said that it might be uncomfortable for the Matzah to make a machal in front of it because they want to. It's a scary situation to confront a person.
If you want your land enough, you will.
But you're saying that's
nowadays we'd say, I'll let the solicitor deal with it. I'll let the solicitor write a letter. I'm uncomfortable, so I won't do it. I'll send my solicitor. Same thing.
All right. And the last question was, it says that you doesn't travel.
Yes.
And you gave the example of those two cities.
Yes.
I think but what we learned, I think it was last week.
Yes.
Was that those two cities were specific circumstances.
That's true.
So you can't use that logic.
That's true. But the way the Marshal explains this Rashbam is that Rova's understanding is that if already you can't travel from there, how much more so you can't travel there? I hear what you're saying. It's a good question, right? Yeah, it's a fair question. But that's how he seems to understand it. It's not. It's even further. Yeah. It's a fair point. It's a fair question. Yeah. Let's carry on the next Rashbam. V'isa al Gadaita, says the Rashbam.
It seemed like there were a lot of suppositions being made.
Well, we work through them. Yeah, but it's at the end of the day, it's essentially a side point. The Rashbam here is just trying to explain, it seems, why it's not just a question from Rabbi Yehuda, and it also works in the Rabbana. But fundamentally, that his question is from the Mishnah on there is a question from the Mishnah on Rav Nachman. And he explains and what spells out. If you're going to say that ain't sorech l'shloach shliach, he doesn't need to send an agent. He repeats it again. You see, v'lim chosh b'fonov be'edim, and object in front of him with witnesses. He can just object wherever he is. And if the matter comes to his ears, let it come. Why does he need to come up to the place where the machzik is? Again, you see, or to send his shliach to object in front of him. Let him sit where he is in Aspamia in Spain, and object in front of witnesses. They are able to go and tell him within 3 years if they want to. And it's not my problem. That's the point. It's not my problem anymore. I don't care whether they go or not. If halacha allows me to make an objection wherever I am in the world, I've done my job. Right? Because there is the theoretical possibility of him hearing about it within 3 years. And therefore, if he loses his documents and he comes along and says, yeah, but I've got no proof. I can say, I made a machar, I did my job. And therefore, as a result, you cannot form a chazaka. And that's his question on Rav Nachman. Right? That's Rav's question on Rav Nachman. If it's true what you're saying, that you can make an objection even in Spain, then there is no reason, right? Then there is no reason why he should need to come. Why he should need to come? Meaning what? There's no reason why he should need to come, which means there's no possibility of forming chazaka. That's the point, right? Right? Because you don't need to come. I can sit where I am, and therefore I should be able to form chazaka because you can make a machal wherever you are. Because again, we're saying it's two sides of the thing, right? Yeah.
And how are you dealing with the news spreading?
Why can't the news spread? The news can't spread. It spreads.
You're saying you can be out more.
You can. If you know it spreads, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I've done my job, and the fact is, it can spread. That's enough. And therefore, the Gemora says, "Sorry, when Mashani wasn't his answer. The answer is that really it's true. Rav Nachman agree. The Rabbi Yehuda, the Mishnah, everyone agrees, like Rav Nachman, that you can make a machal wherever you are. So why does he seem to imply you've got to actually come all the way, and that's why it's not chazak and everything else? Just a good piece of advice. The nesi hu atzmo, that he should come himself, the nishkol karka upeirosov miyad machzik, and take his land and its fruit from the machzik. She'im yimchabim koimai, because if he objects in his place, and he doesn't come now and take the fruit that the guy has eaten, it's very difficult for him to get it out of his hands. The kosher gezel hanechol, because once stuff has been eaten, it's very, very hard to get theft. Stuff eaten in theft is very hard once it's been consumed. And that's how it is. This is Rashbam. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't literally require him to come. This is what he's saying. They only said you need 3 years, so that if the ma'arer, the person claiming it's his, will be in Spain, and after he's machzik, this person is machzik, the sound will travel, the noise will travel, and they'll let him know in the 2nd year. And he'll object at the beginning of the 3rd year. And the matter can come to the ears of the machzik at the end of the 3rd year. And then there's benefits to the person who's claiming it's his. Because if he wants to come at the end of the 3rd year, the 3 years, but I didn't dvar him, right? If he wants, he can come. If he wants, he can come. Pardon? Yeah. If you be able to take the fruit now without any questions, without any having to take him to court over it, basically. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you're right. Yeah. He's just saying he can minimize. All he's saying is that Rabbi Yehuda, the way I'm saying is, Rabbi Yehuda says you can sit there in Spain and you can make objections. We don't mind, and that will work. Not a problem, right? No problem. Why am I telling you to come? I just think it's an advisable thing to do.
trying to get back to his.
Yeah, you're gonna have a tough time. Better you should come. If you see the guys using your property, then you shouldn't leave it. You can if you want, but it's not a clever idea. Occasionally, one will say the phrase "Eita Tova Kamashmalan." Yeah, it's quite common actually in the Gemara. You can ask the question every time the Gemara says "Eita Tova Kamashmalan." You can always ask the question saying, "Okay, but if it's not strictly necessary, why is the Gemara giving good advice?" And the answer is because we're dealing with. Simple answer is because the Gemara is dealing with normal interactions between people. All of these cases is like the Rambam brings these type of cases, as far as I know, in a lot of them anyway, in Toin V'Nitzan. There's a whole section of the Rambam called Hilchos Toin V'Nitzan. Toin V'Nitzan is a Toin as a claimant and a defendant and a claimant. Is that what it's called? Claimant, defendant? Claimant, defendant. As we have in Basin till today. Toin V'Nitzan, Toin V'Nitzan. I'm busy trying to schedule a possible, whatever visit to Manchester to check up on Gerim and things like that. And we're waiting for a scheduling of a din Torah. The turn, I think the turn is agreed, but not the nitzah. Both sides have to agree to the scheduling of the day. Right? So this happens all the time in Basin. You're scheduling a din Torah, you need both parties to agree. There's a turn, the nitzah, claimant and the counterclaimant. However, that means you're dealing with human beings, and human beings are complicated. And therefore, it's not strange that the Gemara will put into that sometimes. Okay, I'm telling you, black and white, this is the rule. The rule is, you started this, you asked this question at the beginning, actually. The rule is, you're fine where you are. Yeah, make an objection, but don't come running to us afterwards. If you come 5 years later, and it's a massive job to get back. Do you understand? Like it's a bit complacent to sit there in Spain and say, that's okay, I made my objection, and the rabbi said I could get my food back. So I'm going to come 5 years later and claim 5 years of crops. I'm going to take you to Basin, I'll get my money back. And you're going to sit in front of me, Basin, and the guy's going to say, what? Got no money. So where are you going to get your money from? I mean, you can, but it's going to be tough, right?
Yeah.
Huh? Yeah, but you don't just want the land. You want the money of the 5 years of crops.
But he wouldn't have the money.
Who, what? Well,
It was in Spain.
yeah, but now I want it back again.
Yeah, but
What do I have the investment for? What do I own this piece of land for? It's my investment.
Unless he
It's my investment for the future.
let it to another tenant, then he's allowed the squatter on it.
No, but that's the point. The point is basically what he's done is he's heard about the squatter. He's heard about the squatter, but he's a bit lazy. He can't be bothered. And he says, 10 years later, when I come back, I'll deal with it. Okay, hey, do that if you want, but it's a very risky strategy because you might not be able to get it back after that. And the final piece of the Gemara was, we saw that Rava himself paskins that an objection not in front of him is a good objection. And therefore, how is it that here he can say, right? Here he can, because if he said before that it's a good objection, you can object in front. Why is he asking Rav Nachman as if he disputes this din that Rav Nachman's saying? He holds it himself. The Gemara answers, Bossa the Shamei Rav Nachman. After once he'd heard it from Rav Nachman, the Tiritz lo tshuva sheheshiveu, and he answered him. He gave him the response that he answered him, which is right that it's just a good piece of advice. And in fact, the whole Mishnah agrees, and the Mishnah as a whole agrees with this idea. You can make a machal wherever you are. Pasuk Rava Hachi. That's how Rava derived the psak, and he agreed with Rav Nachman. Yeah, you can make an objection wherever you are, and that's the kind of the final word, right? You can make an objection wherever you are, because we say the news travels, and since the news travels, and that's I think how we pass, I believe, right? The news travels. Yeah, that's the next Gemara, which we don't have time for today. And the next Gemara is well, part of it. We've defined part of it. We've done a part of it already, because the previous share we explained the limitations, like if you limit the machal, like you say, I don't tell anyone or whatever, right? That's what you say. We explain what you say, the words you say. And now the question is, who do you have to say it to? Is it 2 people? Is it 3 people? And that's where the Gemara gets into this fascinating question, which is the flip side of Lashon Hara. Because there's such a din, which you might be familiar with, but apet losa. Famous Gemara, anything that we say in front of 3 people is not Lashon Hara. What does that mean? It doesn't mean you're allowed to say it. All din in the Chofetz Chaim about this, about whether you know what the scenario is, because it will be revealed. People will know about it, public knowledge. This is the one. The next Gemara is going to talk about this, about going to some of the dinim of Lashon Hara. because you need to clarify what the din is of Lashon Hara to understand what makes news travel. If that makes sense, which is very critical for this Gemara. So we'll meet Shema Karen next time. Okay.
What is the Gemara?